Welcome to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I'm a registered dietitian, health coach, and author, and I'm here to help you streamline your wellness routine and establish a sane, more balanced relationship with food and fitness so you can reach your goals without losing your mind. On this podcast, we'll talk about nutrition, exercise, self-care, mindset, and more. I'll be bringing you interviews and expert insight on the topics that matter to your health and wellness. And welcome back to the Drama-Free Healthy Living podcast. I'm your host, Jess Cording. Today I'm having you guys know, I don't do small talk. It is just not my thing. And I am so thrilled to be chatting with Elise. So Elise and I, we could not remember how we first met each other, first connected. I think it might have been when I was writing an article about her many years ago, and we just have kept in touch and gotten to know each other on the interwebs over these past years. And you guys are in for a treat today. So Elise holds 4 certificates in holistic health and integrative healing. She's on the Environmental Working Group Board of Directors and has been a National Institutes of Health grant recipient for 5 years in a row. A sought-after speaker, she's also host of the popular Once Upon a Food Story podcast. And her work has been featured in, the Oprah magazine, Forbes, Mind Body Green, Self, Elle, Well and Good, and other outlets. She also has a beautiful book out called Food Story, Rewrite the Way You Eat, Think, and Live. So we get into it today. I mean, we talk about Elise and her own food story and how that has evolved over the years. We talk about how to shift and rewrite your own food story, how to communicate your needs to others in your life. And we also talk a lot about what Elise, I love her term for this. She called it food noise and how that can widen the lens a little bit and talk about health noise as well and just how that can impact our health and our well-being and our attitudes around food and our bodies. So we get into it. And it's, I love what she has to share. I know you guys will find it valuable too. So enough of me talking. Let's get to the episode. Elise, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Jess. It's good to be here.
We've been wanting to do this for probably a few years at this point, and it's nice to finally be sitting and doing a recording together.
I know, and I feel like I really know you, even though we've actually never met in real life, but we've gotten to know one another online for, like you said, a few years. So I'm glad that we can go deeper than we can on social media.
Great. I know the internet is wild, just like the way that it, sometimes we talk a lot about how it can divide people, but it also can be a great connector too. And I really love getting to know you and your work. And I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Same here.
So you have this just beautiful podcast, your gorgeous book, but you talk a lot about food story. Can you tell us, our listeners, a little bit about what that is, that this is a new concept to them?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question at the beginning. So food story it came about because I was working with all these really very evolved people, and I had a thriving 101 practice. And I would ask people, so tell me about your relationship with food. And I was really excited to go past eat this. And we're going back to 2013. And every time I'd ask someone, it was almost the same clipped response. Oh, no, let's not go there, or it's complicated. And I thought about it for a while, and I realized that when most people think about their relationship with food, they think of themselves and food. And it's almost like that's where it ends, and it's not dynamic. But when we really think about how we relate to food, there are so many different factors involved. There's villains, diet culture. I'm looking at you. There's heroes, right? And there are different chapters and different seasons and different characters. And so, we're born into a food story. We learn, for better or worse, a lot of things from our caregivers, mostly our parents, so there's so much that goes into the way that we relate to food. It is like a story, and it's always evolving, and it's never ending. Until the end, you're always going to have to eat. So I started calling it a food story almost as an experiment to see if I could get people to open up. And when I did, it was wild because people would say, oh, I never thought about it as a story. And I think using a story and realizing that there's so many different components helps people release a lot of the shame that's around some of our bigger eating challenges. And so that's how Food Story was born. And it's really helped inform a lot of the work and the lens that I see, how we as a society and a culture and, individually relate to food.
I love that so much. And how you said that it's always evolving. I think that's, I'm fascinated by people who, because something that comes up a lot in my work with that, I ask a lot of questions. So that's one of the things I was telling my patients and clients is like, okay, so me, I ask you a lot of questions. And I'm struck by how many people get caught up in trying to do everything that they did like in their 20s, look the same way they looked or live their life the same way, as opposed to just having this natural evolution process, right? And I'd love to hear you share a little bit, depending, how much you're open to, but just kind of growing up, like what your food story was and how that's evolved.
Okay. Well, that it's complicated, it's windy, and I don't want to take up the whole episode just talking about my food story. So I'm going to pick just a few stories or just like really pivotal moments for me. And please stop me if I go on too long. But the first thing I'll say is I grew up in LA. And so that alone probably tells you, especially, when I grew up in like the fat-free era and like, a lot of like rules. And so, and also I grew up with a mom who didn't have any bad intentions, but like was very like diet conscious. There was a lot of diet foods in our house too. So all of that really influenced me. I went to an all-girls school. But I think that when I wrote my book, I realized what those traumas and pivotal moments were for me. And it wasn't until then that I really put two and two together. So the first thing I'll share with you is that when I went to a doctor's appointment when I was 9, the doctor, like I told my mom and the doctor, because those days you got your ears pierced in the doctor's office, that I really wanted to get my ears pierced. And I was told, that if I lost, I don't remember, 5 pounds, 3 pounds, that I could get my ears pierced. And I know like people, when we think back, I don't want everyone to, blame their parents. We do the best we can with what we know at the time, and so they didn't know how harmful that was going to be. But that was when I went on my first diet.
Wow.
I went on a diet. I learned to eat less, exercise, and
at 9 years old.
Yeah, at 9. And mind you, I didn't really have a medical reason. Every child goes through different stages, I think, with their weight or whatever. And sometimes you fill out before you fill up. You grow up, or before puberty or whatever. So anyway, that was like the first time I really learned about it. And then I was just like tuned into all of the conversation that my mom and her friends had. They would like bring their diet salad dressings to dinner, so I just learned all that. And then my dad, who this was totally for him, he would lock the refrigerator at night. And I know that sounds like so extreme, but basically he would sleep eat and not even realize that he was doing it. And so he went to a nutritionist back then who said, why don't you lock? Because it was like one of those pull refrigerators, so he put a padlock around the refrigerator door. And he was like, it had nothing to do with us, and he would like be at the bottom of the stairs and say, you want anything before I lock up? And it was like just such a natural part of our growing up. Like we just knew that he locked the refrigerator. I mean, I'll admit it was embarrassing when we had friends over and you could do like the midnight snacks and all those things. But I learned that food needed to be controlled, and not by anyone trying to harm me, but that was just the message that, I learned as a young child. And so what happened, I was always as a young adult or even earlier, like just on the hunt for the perfect diet, the perfect body, and it consumed so much of my brain, and it's interesting to talk about it now because I'm so far from that space. But it was, think about that. You miss out on so much pleasure, enjoyment, and actually being present with all the people around you. And so I practiced law and then, a few things happened and I ended up going into nutrition. It was just always where my heart was. I was always interested in wellness. And so I didn't take all the science classes that, you take if you decide in college that you want to be a nutrition. I took all the pre-law classes, but then I got certified in holistic nutrition. And I felt like there was this missing piece. And the missing piece was the mind. and because I was eating all the right things, and so were many of my clients. And then this is back in like 2012. And I realized that, so much of what we like our relationship with food, our food story happens in our own mind. And so I got certified in eating psychology. And not only did that really help me heal my own food story, but it gave me tools to work with other people. And the big thing, like the real big thing that I learned from is how what you think is just as important as what you eat. Because if you're thinking stressful thoughts, and we can go into this later, you're going to set up a whole physiological response with cortisol and metabolism shutting down or not being as efficient, and you're not going to absorb as many nutrients. And so all of this happens because whether true or not, you're thinking I shouldn't be eating this, or is this going to bloat me, or is this part of my plan or food rules? And so once I realized that, I started working what was going on internally, and that changed everything.
So cool. And yes, I have had so many people have similar experiences. People I've worked with, have similar experiences where they realize how big a role the mind plays. And it's like this whole new world opens up. And that's when they're able to really see the changes they want to see, feel this calmness around food. Like for you, was it like a light bulb moment, or was it like a gradual process where you were like, oh, I'm starting to realize that, I've been really preoccupied on these things? And or what was that like for you?
It's really interesting because I feel like that learning about the physiological stress response from thoughts about food was a huge aha moment. But the thing is that even when I stopped looking for the perfect diet or trying to have the perfect, and I'm putting that in quotes because we obviously know that doesn't exist, but when I stopped with like these self-imposed food rules that was like, putting so much pressure on myself, I was still like, here I was starting, more of my online business, and I had young kids, and I was putting all this pressure on myself to be the role model, to do things perfectly that way. So yes, I took the eating perfectionism, as I like to call it, off my plate, but then it transferred into something else, and so I realized and I think a lot of people actually who are in the wellness space have put this kind of pressure on themselves, or even people who might not be in the wellness space, but who are trying to, achieve optimum health or, whatever it might be, whatever their goals, they're still so preoccupied with doing it the right way, and that alone can be stressful, and stress can create the stress chemicals too. So it was an aha moment, but it also kind of transferred. And then I realized this isn't healthy either. So a lot of, for me, was allowing myself to live and releasing, the tight grip that I had on how much of a role that, all these rules played in my life.
Oh my gosh, that makes perfect sense. And I think what you said about people in the wellness space, I feel like it's kind of an open secret that so many of the people in the space just have a totally fucked up relationship with food, or at one point did. And
yes, exactly. And I feel like that's what drives people. Sometimes we teach what we need to learn.
Yeah. I've been very open in my work about, my experiences with having an eating disorder very, very young. I think if it was today, it would probably have been classified as orthorexia, but I developed a ton of food phobias when I was 11, 12, because I had a grandparent who had their own food stuff and was going through cancer treatment. And I was watching them die, and I was didn't know how to cope. And I was like, well, they got cancer, and they, and they said that these foods are bad, so I shouldn't eat those foods. And it took a number on my psyche, my physical health at a really young age. And the weird upside of that was that, because I had parents who were just kind of watching this happen, they were like, we should go to the doctor. And my pediatrician said I had a quote unquote feeding problem without the fixed it. But I ended up being connected with a dietitian and a therapist at this very young age. And I guess because of the diagnosis, because I think they did diagnose it as anorexia nervosa, which I actually find fascinating now, because at this time, there wasn't much discussion in the literature about it. If you read old papers, but now it's talked about more as an option of an anxiety disorder. And I hear that and I'm like, oh, well, yeah, Of course. Like, I never had that experience of being fixated on my body and like my appearance. It was always more about just like anxiety and the control piece and not really being able to quite articulate like the appearance aspect of it, that often is stereotyped in media representations. But, I just in a lot of ways, like that experience, which was a challenge early on, like it really saved me a lot of drama down the road. I didn't go through a lot of the same body woes that my peers did. I didn't have the same, I was less affected by diet culture because I had this early experience and got to work with experts who were, I believe covered under my insurance, which was wild. That doesn't always happen, but certain diagnoses you do get some reimbursement for, but even then, but yeah, it's, but I've been very open about that. Early in my career, though, I was not. I was terrified of anybody finding that out about me because I thought it would make me less credible as an expert. But what I found, honestly, in my career is that, not that I think there's a fine line, right? Like you don't want to bring all your shit into the room and make your sessions about you. But I think for certain clients, patients, I think that it can be really helpful for someone to know that you understand some aspects of what they might be going through. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I related to so much of what you said. So the first thing, I don't know if the term orthorexia was around when I was going through, but I know that I had that, because it was just a preoccupation with like health, right? To the point though, where it was hindering life. I mean, that's what I think that orthorexia is. And, I think it's easy, especially now, and it goes undiagnosed because like even this morning, I was reading something about our pans, that we use for cooking, and I'm on EWG's board, right? So I know a lot about the PFAS and, and it kind of freaked me out though, because I'm like, okay, I'm evolved and I know about this, but whoa, and there was just so much information. And so I could see how, we have like environmental orexia, about and keeping all the toxins and the organics. And so I think that there's like a point where you have to be, I'm doing my best and then you let it go. But also what you said about sharing your story, I think that that's such a huge, people like learning you've been through it because then you can like understand, their journey a little better because you've been there before. And we all connect with our stories. Like that's why you are hosting this podcast and why I have Once Upon a Food Story, and always ask people to share some part of their food story because it used to be shameful to talk about those things. And I think the more we talk about it, the less shameful it becomes.
Oh, absolutely. There's so many things like that. Yeah. I think, I'm curious to see if, cause having grown up in more of a culture where it's like you're conditioned not to share and then learning how to share in a way that feels authentic to you, like that being able to be kind of like, now we hear things like your vulnerability is your superpower. Like that was not talked about, a number of years ago. And I'm curious to see if people who are at the younger generation, like I have nieces and nephews who are teenagers, and I'm just curious to see what it's going to be like for them. If it's going to be any easier, if it's going to be harder. I don't know.
Yeah. I know because they're used to seeing more things online. Like we didn't grow up with like everyone exposing, their innermost feelings. I'm like you though. I like to share, but I don't like to lead. Like I feel like, enough to make yourself relatable, but especially if you're, like you said, if you're in a session with someone else, you want it to be about them, but enough to say, hey, I get you, or,
I think I can relate to what you were saying about, even though you know better, you've done all this work on yourself. Like, I feel like there's so many opportunities for us to freak out. Like you were talking about the nonstick cookware. Like that happens in my world all the time because I spend so much time in the oncology space. And then, I don't talk about it as much on my social media and my business, but like one day when my fertility journey is in the past tense, or as I jokingly call it, my spiritual quest, like I'm sure I will have so much to say about all the different things that I have gotten freaked out about momentarily being like, oh my God, I can't believe this, and like someone who literally does like myth busting as part of my day-to-day job will have those moments where I have to catch myself and be like, hey, chill out. Okay. Like that, your shampoo is not the reason you don't have a baby yet, like, or whatever it might be, but it's so easy when we see all this information to get stuffed into things.
So I know you wanted to ask me about this, so I'm going to bring it up though without you asking me. So I have something called food noise that I like to talk about, and I feel like this is the perfect segue for it. And, we can't avoid it. I mean, and so let's broaden it. So health noise, right? So it's more than just about food, because if we're talking about all the environmental toxins and everything, we can't avoid it, especially now when we're like plugged in so much more than we used to be. I was thinking about like how when we didn't go on social media, like how many hours and how much space we had in our brain for other things. But what I want to say about food noise is that we're not immune. None of us, like, we're just going to hear it. And so we can put boundaries. There are things that we can do, but we're not going to be able to avoid it, but we can change the way that we respond to it. So something I like to share with people is like, notice how your body feels when you hear certain things, or even if it's like following someone on Instagram or like an email that you receive in your inbox, and it just it's not one time, but it's just not landing right for you. It doesn't feel intuitively like this is good wisdom for you. And something that Jess, we were talking about earlier, is that a lot of people who aren't qualified are giving advice that they're not qualified to give. And so, we just make sure that you check who you're listening to. And there's something also, like, it could be a conversation with a friend. I mean, this is a common quote I've seen, like, don't take advice from someone whose life you wouldn't want, who you wouldn't want to be like, or whose life you want to have, something like that. Right.
Love that.
And I think that we are most vulnerable to all the noise when we're not feeling great about ourselves. So whether it's you're not feeling great in your body, you're not feeling great because of your career, it doesn't matter. But if you're like more vulnerable and in, a place of, I really want to change, I want to grow, I want to do something different, the noise is going to seep in more because you're looking, to change. And that doesn't mean you can't be curious or you can't try new things, try new foods, try whatever it is, but just know you're trying it and seeing how it feels for you, which might be very different than it feels for the doctor, the influencer, and whoever is, suggesting this for you.
Thank you for sharing that, by the way, because I do see this all the time in my work too, where people think that just because something works for their friend or their doctor recommends it, or, someone else in their orbit, that means that it has to work for them. And we're all so different. We all need different things. We're coming from somewhere different. And I always try to remind people of that we all are different humans having different versions of a human experience. And, not everybody needs the same thing.
And then that goes back to your point earlier, is that we're different now than we were, 20 years ago or 15 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, even, and so think about where you are right now. I always love at like ending right now, like the sentence with right now, to put it in context, because we go through different seasons, like literally different seasons. I mean, fall, summer is totally different, like what your body needs, what your mind needs, but also you go through different seasons in life. Right. And I mean, to bring it to one of your expertise, just like when you're a caregiver and, and not able to do certain things or need different nutrients than you might need when, you're doing training for a marathon or whatever,
right.
And so it's always really important to evaluate where you are right now.
Cheers to that. It's so important.
Yeah. And so a really great exercise, if you're like, okay, well, how do I even know where the food noise exists, is to like pay attention just one day, like walk into your kitchen. Do you have like a protein powder? Even that could be food noise, that reminds you of like a diet that you went on or a cleanse that didn't work, right? Or are there books that kind of subconsciously, that you're keeping around that shouldn't be in eye's view, or, that's like, so that could be a place. Just pay attention, like to your emails, to what you're seeing in your feed, all of that stuff, and in the conversations you're having with people. And it's pretty easy to change conversation. Even if people are talking about like their favorite new lifestyle plan, you can be like, I'm so glad that works for you. And like, and then move on to something different that, so that you're acknowledging them and not shutting them off entirely, but you're not letting it be about you too, and start the whole line of questioning, should I try this? Should I do this? Is it, all of
Yes.
that.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that part about acknowledging, because I find that oftentimes that's something that deep down people really want. Like a lot of the time, if somebody is talking about the thing that worked for them, it's on a subconscious level, maybe they want their efforts to be acknowledged. They want someone to acknowledge, yes, this is working great for you. And just one way that we've kind of been conditioned to get that kind of validation is through like getting other people to do it our way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. And you shouldn't be, if you're that person, you shouldn't be offended if someone doesn't do it, but I do agree that we can validate their experiences for them, but not let it seep in and necessarily think it's something for us.
Yeah. So if somebody is, if we wanted that, we talked a little bit about some of the signs that somebody is like a little preoccupied with food, and that maybe their food story is something that they should reevaluate, we'll say. But what might you say in terms of like a good starting place? Or, if you were meeting with a new client and, they're like, I really want this to change, what are some first steps that you would recommend?
I love that you just said that they said that they want this to change. Because I think with anything, whatever habit, whatever, difference you want to make in your life, like you have to want it. It can't be from someone else suggesting it. It really has to come from you. So that's the first thing. It's like, I really want to change this. This isn't either sustainable or this is interfering with me, with my career, my relationships, and so acknowledging that it's time for change and I'm ready for it is huge. But also, just even starting with like what is a recurring theme, to stick with food story language, or an eating challenge that like you probably lived with for longer than you want to admit, and what is that? Because I like starting with some like a behavior, a pattern, because then it makes it really tangible, because your food story is like, your whole life you've been living your food story. And then I think really trying to figure out when it started, because sometimes if you can tie it to an event, a divorce, a move, a death of a loved one, bullying, so oftentimes there is some reason. And then when you can attach it to that like time period, or it will help release some of the shame that you're feeling about it. And then you're like, wait, it started then. And okay, it might have helped me, or it was my coping mechanism then, but it's not necessarily what I need now. Right. So really just like trying to understand your behaviors and patterns and where they come from can be a huge step. And it also, when you start thinking about it, it helps open doors to thinking about other aspects of your story too. Your limiting beliefs, which are huge. And sometimes we live with these beliefs for so long, they're like almost unconscious, and we're not even aware that they're informing our behaviors and choices. And so really like digging in and understanding what is my belief system about food? Sometimes it might be what your mom believed, and that like it's outdated, right? So just uncovering those kind of things helps. And one thing leads to another, when you start down that path. Does that answer your question?
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. And I was chatting with someone today, actually, founder of a company we were just remembering, back in the 90s when they were teaching kids that avocado was fattening and they shouldn't be teaching kids that they're fattening first off, but it was the 90s. And then that avocado was like bad for you and that we should all be eating snack bowls cookies. It's like,
yes, I remember
the opposite of what we do today. Like it's just, it's amazing how much things have evolved in this case.
Yeah.
In a good way.
And then I want to just like touch back on something that I mentioned before. And to your point, I'm sure there are things now like that, or that I did as a parent, that I'm like, I would never do that if I had this information. And so when we're looking back and thinking about our beliefs, like it's easy to want to blame, whoever was participated in that, whether it was snack bowls instead of avocado or whatever. And so I just always want people not to feel angry, because most parents especially do the best they can with the knowledge that they have at that time. And so my mom, for example, thought she was doing a good thing by giving us snack wells, putting them in the freezer, and like stocking up on snack milk instead of avocado. I mean, now we do things differently. So, I just want to make sure, because I don't want people to be angry at their family or whoever, was very influential in their food story.
And it's a really good point to make. I think that it's also easy to blame ourselves at other times, for the decisions that we may have made when we were just making decisions with the best information we had. So whether it's, forgiving others in our life or forgiving ourselves, because I think we're all just kind of doing our best, or hopefully.
Yeah. But nutrition is such a not established field. It's still young and evolving. And I mean, we know how controversial some things are. And so sometimes we do things and then we realize, no, that's not as good for you as we once thought, or this is not going to create problems for you. I don't even want to give examples because I don't want to vilify anything or, have people, say, well, she said, but you know what I'm talking about. Like we tend to like jump on things and like, then everything has that ingredient in it. Like as a culture, we do that, right? Have you ever been to any of Expo West or Expo East?
So I've not been to either of those, but the closest thing I can think of, like the Integrative Healthcare Symposium is always an interesting expo hall, but the Food Nutrition Conference and Expo for registered dietitians, like the different, you're like, how many things can cauliflower be made into?
Exactly. Well, that's what I was going to say. So I remember one year, I haven't been in a few years because of, it was shut, whatever. Anyway, so I haven't been in a few years, but like CBD was in everything, in drinks and all the, it was just like, that was the ingredient du jour, and now you don't really see CBD in as many things. So I think that these sometimes trends aren't really trends and they're mainstay, they stay, but I think we also have to take trends with the grain of salt. Just because it's in everything doesn't mean that you need to take, 15 supplements and eat every drink every drink or have every product that has CBD or whatever it might be.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that comes up a lot in my world, just talking about supplements and just like, oh, I saw this thing on social media. That means I should have it, right? Or I heard this thing is good. Does that mean I should be taking? And then they're overdoing like the certain vitamins and minerals because they're taking multiple like supplement forms, fortified food forms. Like it's easy to go nuts without even realizing it. And that's not, because nowhere, like each of these companies, they're trying to sell their individual products. It's not like they're saying like, you can use this product, but if you also take this product and that product, and you're eating this thing fortified, we don't have that level of nuance. But I'm curious to see what the next thing will be. I feel like every year there's like a different nutrient or a different ingredient. I feel like functional mushrooms are having a moment right now.
I totally agree with that. I know I love seeing what the food trends are, because some of the trends actually have staying power, and they're actually not really trends, but they're just coming into we're becoming more aware of them. And some of them are like Ayurvedic or have been around for, thousands of years, but they're just now becoming more mainstream. But it'll be interesting to see what the trends are for this upcoming year, which is so soon.
Oh my gosh. I know. It's so great. I don't know where the time goes. Actually, you gave me a really lovely segue into a question I wanted to ask you. And that is, as we get to, I think this episode will be out before we get into like New Year, New You season. But I find that, as New Year's resolution season comes out, or anytime someone is starting to, make changes with their diet, their exercise routine, or other things. I know I talk a lot in my work about sleep. Someone is establishing new routines for themselves to support their goals, in a mindful way. I'm not talking like super restrictive plans that are not helpful. But I mean, I know in my house, like a few years ago, like because of, I have to watch my cholesterol just because of, genetics. Like it's just something I have to pay attention to. And I remember saying to my husband, I was like, hey, listen, like I need to keep an eye on this. Like I'm going to be changing a little bit of what I cook for dinner most nights. Like, I'm not asking you to get on board. I'm just telling you it's going to be a little different. I'm like, and I'm curious to hear, I'm not saying that that's the exact right way to approach all situations, but I know something that comes up in my work with my clients is communicating our needs and really because, it's one thing to have a goal, right? But then we have to come up with the action steps that are going to help us work towards that goal and being able to communicate to others in our life, what we need to be successful. And I find that a lot of people struggle with that. And I've certainly had my versions of struggle with that too, whether it's been related to food things or lifestyle things, emotional things. But do you have any tips that you would like to share for communicating our needs around food, or whether it's kind of like, emotional things or just changes you're making to your daily routine?
Well, I think that most of it is you want to change for yourself, right? So you want to figure out what you need to do to make that change happen, not to be reliant on other people to make that change happen, and I know, when you're cooking for a family, or if you have a partner or your, coworker that you like go out to lunch and drinks with or whatever. And if you're going to be doing things differently, they might not always be on board. And so it's really interesting because I just did a podcast episode on self-love with someone, and it was a fantastic conversation. And she was saying that when you put yourself first and your own needs first, sometimes you end up losing people, and then, I've been thinking about that a lot because, obviously you can't lose like family members or whatever, but just how maybe they weren't meant to go with you into this next chapter. I'm not talking about your partner or, your kids or parents or anything like that. But if it's like a friend or colleague who you're always having, maybe you need to do things differently. But the first thing is just really making sure that, is this sustainable? Can I do this for me? And then how can I either bring my family in or do this in a way so that I'm still meeting my family's needs? So maybe you might cook your dinner a tiny bit differently than you cook for your kids, but that doesn't mean that you can't all sit down at a table together and enjoy a meal, which is really a nourishing meal. Nourishment for them might be different nourishment for you, And so it goes back also to that other question about validating that we were talking about. You don't, if you're looking for someone to validate you to make the change, then it's not really coming from you. It shouldn't be contingent upon that. But if you're like, hey, I'm going to be doing things a little different and I just want you to know. And I'd love for you to try, let's say you want to eat more plants. I'd love for you to try it. We'll still cook some of the same meals or whatever, that we normally do, but we'll have a little, we'll have soups that are more plant-based. I just brought that up because I want to give a tangible example. So you can try to bring them along, but if they're still stuck in their ways, that doesn't mean you can't change.
Thank you for sharing that, because I talk about that with my clients all the time. I cannot, and it doesn't, this is an observation. This is not necessarily a fact, but something I've seen in my practice is that very often, women or, people who identify as women, we'll say, are conditioned to put everyone else first and to try to make everybody happy. And when we're talking about food, I think there is a lot of pressure to make things that are going to make things that'll make everyone happy, which can either mean that they don't get what they need because they're trying to do what will please others in their family, or they feel pressure to make 5 different dinners. I see both of those a lot. And one of the biggest barriers I see to people making changes is because they're overwhelmed by figuring that out. And I like what you shared about how, maybe you can prepare your particular items slightly differently, but you can still all eat together. Like an example I really like is you brought up more plant meals. I work with a lot of people who are trying to eat more plants, and I'll be like, well, hey, the family's having burgers, you can make yourself a veggie burger. It's all going on the grill or grill pan, and you all eat together. But it's not extra work for you. I think there are ways to figure it out.
Yeah,
put yourself first.
Yeah, exactly. And also I have 2 points that I'd love to make with that. So with eating more plants, no matter what, dietary lifestyle you choose to follow, whether it's a label or just a way of eating that suits you. I think it's undisputable that eating more plants is good for everyone. So that doesn't mean because you're eating more plants, you don't eat meat, or because and so everyone can choose whatever their ratio of plants, whether it's all plant-based versus eating some animal protein. And I think that that you have to allow for those differences, and it's not necessarily like, oh, I can't do this because my husband, kids, whatever, aren't exactly doing it the same way. We're all so uniquely different. And we also all change depending on our seasons, and so I think it's just, you make the plans and everyone chooses how much they have and if they want to add anything else to it. So that's a really great way to add in more plants, because I feel like that's a huge thing coming up on the New Year's, and not make it something that divides us. And then the next thing that I want to say is that I decided when my kids were young, and I would love to just share this for any moms or new moms, that I was not going to be a short order chef or cook, whatever, that I was going to make one meal. And of course, it wasn't like, it was somewhat like something that kids would like, but it wasn't like just kid food. And it worked because that's what they grew up with and that's what they knew. And it's really interesting. My boys, they're not really boys anymore, but they both go to the farmer's market. They know how to cook. And, it's kind of one of my proud mom things. I was far from perfect, but I am really proud of the fact that they picked up on those things without it being an issue.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really empowering for our listeners to hear.
Yeah. So it's like a show, don't tell too. That's another thing. That's another tip to answer your question, that you don't always have to tell. If it's not going to impact them, you can just do it. And people will see you thriving and feeling good and be like, I want what she's having.
I see that come up a lot in conversations around reducing alcohol intake, because that's something that comes up a ton in my work. And people are so afraid that people are going to notice they're not drinking as much, or that they're like, how am I going to be around other people? And 91% of the time, people don't notice. Or if they do notice, they don't usually say anything.
Right.
For those that do, you can decide how to respond to that. That's another place I see that come up a lot.
I agree with you. And I feel like it's really comes up a lot right now, because there's such a huge sober, curious movement. And a lot of people have paid attention to what the impact of alcohol can be on our brains and bodies. And so they're choosing to have less or reduce it by a lot. I don't drink, but I don't make a public announcement about it. It's just what I'm choosing and what feels right for me. And I stopped drinking because we would go out on Saturday nights and it was like date night, or we'd go with other couples. And then I was training for a lot of marathons when I was younger, and I'd feel so crappy on my Sunday runs. And so I just stopped drinking during that time period. And I realized I don't actually really enjoy it and it doesn't feel good, but I don't say I don't drink ever. I mean, I never had a problem with alcohol. And so I understand if someone has, that's a whole different situation. But I don't put all these rules. I just do what feels right. So if I have a glass of wine every now and then, it's not a big deal, but 90% of the time I'm not drinking.
And I'm in the same boat. I accidentally stopped drinking 2 years ago because I was going through just a really bad sleep phase. And I realized I actually don't feel great when I drink. And, for the very few times a year now where I might have a little alcohol, but I know what I'm getting myself into sleep wise. It's just, but again, my relationship, a lot of alcoholism in my family. So I'm relieved I don't have that relationship with it. But, I think you do have to kind of find your own place with that stuff. And it's cool. There's so many, non-alcoholic options now. When you want something different from water or seltzer or whatnot, which is pretty cool. It's been interesting to see all the innovation in that category.
Yeah. And for the first time, I actually started ordering mocktails. We were in Colorado this summer and I was like, oh, it just sounded fun. And they've been around for a while and I've made a few here and there, but I just started ordering them just because I was curious and I wanted to be able to support people who might have a harder time, not having something in their hand because we're so conditioned socially, to have a drink, when we go out. And so they're fun. There's some really interesting combinations. I've learned about new flavors and ingredients from ordering the mocktail. So that's a whole nother conversation. But.
Oh my God. I love that stuff so much. My husband runs a distillery and has a background in beverage industry, and he's not a big drinker either, but through him, like I've learned so much about all these different ways of creating flavors and experiences. And it's fascinating. Now, I know I've gotten a little bit off topic and I want to be mindful of your time, but I had just a couple more questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I think actually alcohol is a huge part of so many people's food stories. So I'm glad that you brought it up.
That's a really good point. Yeah. It's whether it's like something you grew up with or something you came to, it definitely plays a big role for a lot of people.
Especially the last few years.
Yes. Oh my goodness. We don't even like the event that shall not be named.
We don't like saying the P word anymore.
Oh my God. I know. So oh my gosh, so much I could say about that. But what I wanted to just ask you about, I do think that, in the wellness world, we'll say, there's a lot of talk around routines and self-care, and like, it's so easy to like think we have to have like a 19-step morning routine and whatnot. But I would love to know for you at this moment in time, what are some of your self-care essentials?
Okay, really good question. And it's so interesting that you asked this. I was looking at my blog post and I just like updated one that was all about having non-negotiables. And I was like, I know I talked about this many years ago, but it really felt relevant to me right now because we're so busy and we have so much coming at us. And the only way that you're going to do the things that are really important to you is if you schedule them or you make this commitment to those routines, right? And I'll tell you what mine are in a minute. But, again, it's super easy to watch influencers like they'll meditate, get their morning sunlight, have their whole coffee ritual, beautiful breakfast, journal, blah, 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 all before, taking their kids to school. And, and it's just impossible for most people to do all those things. And then they feel bad about it because they haven't done the 10 things that the wellness world says you need to do every single morning. And so I feel like, two things I want to say is that you have to create a routine that's really sustainable for you. And then if you get in the extra, it's bonus, right? Instead of creating a routine of all the things you want to do and then feeling bad about it. So I think that's really, really important. So for me, like and this is I've always been into movement. That's just like a way of life for me that on the days that I don't move in the morning, I don't feel like myself. So it's just become a lifestyle. So movement can be a lot of different things. It could be walking my dog, it could be running, doing a class, going to yoga, Pilates. I'm a big class person, but so I love movement, but I'm really religious about getting the morning sun. And this started, way before that it was on everyone's, page, that you got to get the morning sunlight because it felt good. And I understood a little bit of the science, but now I really know that it does make a difference for sleep and, your circadian rhythm. But it's just such a great way to like get that natural sunlight first thing in the morning. Another thing that is really important, and I wouldn't say that I'm 100%, is that I do not pick up my phone first thing. Because what happens when you do that, and this is really hard to do because we're also conditioned to check or you turn your alarm off or whatever, is then we start our day in everybody else's energy. You're reactive, you're answering emails, or you're quickly responding to a text or whatever, but then your day isn't your own and it's not starting out how you want it to start out. So I'm not perfect. I know this is the hardest one, but I try to start my day like with the morning sunlight, movement. I have a matcha ritual, which I moved it now to like 11 a.m., in between things. It's very grounding for me. Not just because of the nutrients, which you get the L-theanine, which is great for focus. And it's a way that it buffers it's an amino acid that buffers the caffeine. So I am caffeine sensitive, but I can have matcha. And then, in the middle of the day, I like to take a break and do some sort of either breath work or just like calm. I don't have to do anything, but I need to come back to myself. And, the morning routines are great. The evening routines are awesome too. But I think that just like you eat several times a day to balance your blood sugar, you need to do things throughout the day to keep your mood stable so that you're more proactive instead of reactive. And so those are like, and then I always try to once a week, I always go to the farmer's market. Those are some of my, I consider that really self-care because I'm, getting the food for the week. I'm thinking about it. I'm connecting with the people who grew it. I'm a community of like-minded people. I share that a lot on my Instagram. It's a big part of my routine. And then I do like to not crazy meal prep. That's not attainable. I do like to have some things made because I feel like I make better choices when I have it quickly available to me, and so make this time of year, I'll make a pot of soup always. Like I love having soup and just do a couple, roast some veggies, make a chia pudding, whatever, salad dressing, just quickly, not so that it feels like, oh my gosh, this is taking up my whole day and I resent it, but just have a few things ready to go. And of course, having the food there. So those are my non-negotiables, right? And they feel like self-care to me. And, and I'm giving my body the message and my brain that like what I do for myself is really important and it matters.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that. And I can relate about the soup and the vegetables. Like I like the easy meal prep with the big batches of things that you can use in different ways through the week. I love that so much. I'm definitely not one to want to spend my entire Saturday or Sunday.
Well, I feel like one of your strengths is like you help people break things down and create really sustainable habits. You help people really, make it bite size instead of feeling overwhelmed by wellness.
Yeah, thank you. That's always the goal. It should feel approachable and doable.
Yeah, well, it is with you. I think.
I want to also shine a spotlight on where can people, one, buy your book, but also you have a wonderful podcast. Where can people listen to that?
Well, you're going to be a guest, so your listeners shouldn't miss that episode with you on the other side of the mic. My podcast is called Once Upon a Food Story, and you can listen to it wherever you listen to your podcast. And that's probably one of my favorite things to do because just like now, you really get to go deep into conversation with people and talk about things that you can't possibly fit on a blog post or on social media. So I love that. And I love sharing other people's wisdom and stories. I'm on Instagram, my name, Facebook. It's Elise Muselis. I'm sure you'll be linking everything in the show notes.
Yep.
And then my book is called Food Story, Rewrite the Way You Eat, Think, and Live. And we talked about a lot of the things in my book, but obviously it's a book and has more information, and that is wherever books are sold. And I also have something called the Food Mood Bundle. And that is a digital download that's interactive to help people use food to help them feel the way they want to feel. And that's on my website, which also has recipes and other things, which is just my name, elisemuselis.com.
Amazing. And yes, we will link all that in the show notes to make it super easy for you guys all listening to check that out. So Elise, thank you for coming on today. I only have one more question for you. And this is a question I ask all my guests because I just love how many different ways there are to interpret this. And that question is, so today, at this moment in time, because I know this is always evolving for all of us, but what would you say that healthy living means to you?
That's a good one. Right now, I think healthy living is about feeling connected to yourself and honoring how you feel, and doing things to help you feel the way you want to feel. That's a good question, actually, Jess. I like it a lot.
There's so many different ways that, that can show up for us. And I really appreciate you just sharing that with me. It's so great to hear what a different response all of my guests have, how many, like 100 something episodes we've done of this. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it's good. Well, thank you so much for having me. And also just thank you for everything that you're doing. I mean, you do so much, and I love your approach, and I love connecting with you. And I'm so happy that we got to have this conversation.
You and likewise. If you guys don't already follow Elise on all the socials, get over there and you will love her beautiful content and just all of the approachable tips and tools she has to share. So as always, you guys, I am so grateful that you're here with me today. If you like what you hear on today's show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. They do matter, and they help me continue to bring you guys excellent guests like Elise. And like, share, subscribe. And I would love for you to send me a DM about what you thought about this episode. You can screenshot yourself listening to it with some of your thoughts. So always, guys, have a wonderful day. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for listening to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. We'll see you next time.